Picture this, it's 1853, and a single diplomatic dispute over who controls the keys to a church in Bethlehem is about to trigger the most devastating war Europe has seen in decades. What started as a religious argument between French Catholics and Russian Orthodox Christians would end up reshaping the entire continental map, destroying empires and creating nations that exist to this day. You're about to discover how the Crimean War, yes, that seemingly forgotten conflict, became the earthquake that cracked the foundation of European power forever. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll never look at modern Europe the same way again. Let me take you back to a world where the Ottoman Empire still stretched across 3 continents, where Russia was expanding like a hungry giant, and where a single miscalculation would change everything. The year was 1853, and Tsar Nicholas I of Russia made what he thought was a brilliant move. He demanded the right to protect all Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. This wasn't about religious freedom, this was about carving up the sick man of Europe, as Nicholas himself called the Ottoman Empire. The Tsar was essentially demanding control over 12 million Orthodox subjects of the Sultan, giving Russia unprecedented influence over Ottoman internal affairs. But here's where it gets interesting. The British and French weren't about to let Russia dominate the eastern Mediterranean and threaten their trade routes to India and beyond. What started as a religious dispute quickly became a geopolitical chess match with the highest stakes imaginable. Napoleon III of France saw an opportunity to restore French prestige after decades of British dominance. Britain's Lord Palmerston recognized the existential threat to British imperial interests, and the Ottomans. They were fighting for their empire's very survival. When Russian forces crossed into Ottoman territories in modern-day Romania in July 1853, the die was cast. By March 1854, Britain and France had declared war on Russia, transforming a regional conflict into the first truly modern war Europe had ever witnessed. Now here's what makes this war absolutely fascinating, and why it changed everything. For the first time in history, war correspondents were sending daily reports via telegraph. People back home were reading about battles just days after they happened. The Crimean War became the first media war, and public opinion suddenly mattered in ways it never had before. William Howard Russell of the Times shocked British readers with his brutal accounts of military incompetence and soldier suffering. His reports about the disastrous charge of the Light Brigade and the appalling conditions in military hospitals didn't just inform the public, they outraged them and demanded change. But the real game changer wasn't just the media coverage. It was how this war completely shattered the balance of power that had kept Europe stable since 1815. The Congress of Vienna system, which had maintained peace for nearly 40 years, crumbled in the trenches of Let me paint you a picture of the carnage. The siege of Sebastopol lasted 349 days. 349 days of relentless bombardment, desperate sorties, and innovations in warfare that would define conflicts for the next century. The Russians, defending their great naval fortress, showed incredible resilience under Prince Menshikoff's leadership. The Allied forces, British, French, Ottoman, and later Sardinian, threw everything they had at this massive fortification. The British had their famous thin red line of Highland regiments. The French brought their experienced Zouave troops from Algeria. The Ottomans fought with a determination that surprised their European allies who had dismissed them as the sick man. Florence Nightingale wasn't just tending to wounded soldiers. She was revolutionizing military medicine and, unknowingly, changing how Europeans viewed war itself. Her meticulous statistics showed that more soldiers were dying from disease and neglect than from battle wounds. This wasn't just healthcare reform. It was a fundamental shift in how civilized nations were expected to conduct warfare. The human cost was staggering. Conservative estimates put total casualties at over 500,000 dead. The British lost 21,000 men, mostly to disease. The French lost 95,000. The Russians, estimates vary wildly, but it was likely over 200,000. These weren't just numbers. They represented the breakdown of old certainties about European civilization and progress. But here's the hidden story that most people never learn. While Europe was fixated on the dramatic battles in Crimea, the real action was happening in the diplomatic salons of Vienna, Paris, and London. Count Cavour of Sardinia had sent 15,000 troops to fight alongside the Allies, not because he cared about Ottoman Christians, but because he was playing a brilliant long game for Italian unification. Cavour understood something that would prove prophetic. This war would create opportunities for nations that didn't exist yet. By aligning Sardinia with the victorious Allies, he earned the right to bring up the Italian question at the peace conference. It was diplomatic genius that would pay dividends within a decade. The war's end in 1856 brought the Treaty of Paris, and this is where Europe's borders began their dramatic transformation. The Black Sea was declared neutral. No warships, no naval bases. Russia lost its exclusive influence over Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. The Danubian principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia gained autonomy under European guarantee. But wait, there's more. The treaty abolished the slave trade in the Black Sea, established new principles of maritime law, and most importantly, brought the Ottoman Empire into the European state system as an equal member. For the first time, a Muslim power was formally recognized as part of the European balance of power. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The Danubian principalities, those territories that gained autonomy. Within 5 years, they would unite to form Romania. That's right, Romania exists today because of a war fought over church keys in Bethlehem. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Russia's defeat didn't just sting, it revolutionized the entire empire. Tsar Alexander II, who came to power during the war, realized that Russia needed fundamental reform to compete with Western powers. The humiliation in Crimea directly led to the emancipation of the serfs in 1861, railway construction across the empire, and military modernization. But the most dramatic border changes were still to come. Prussia's Otto von Bismarck watched the Crimean War with the calculating eyes of a future empire builder. He saw how the concert of Europe had collapsed, how Russia was weakened, and how France and Austria were now rivals rather than partners. Within a decade of the Crimean War's end, Bismarck would exploit these new divisions to launch 3 wars that would create Germany and fundamentally alter the European map. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 ejected Austria from German affairs forever. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 created the German Empire and annexed Alsace-Lorraine to Germany. Think about this: the modern map of Central Europe, the existence of Germany as a unified state, the borders of France, the independence of Romania, the decline of Ottoman Europe. All of this traces back to that moment in 1853, when Tsar Nicholas I decided he could dismember the Ottoman Empire. The Crimean War also marked the beginning of the end for multi-ethnic empires and the rise of nation-states. The principle of nationality, that people with shared language, culture, and history should govern themselves, gained tremendous momentum after 1856. Italian unification accelerated dramatically. Cavour used his newfound diplomatic capital to ally with Napoleon III against Austria in 1859. The victories at Magenta and Solferino liberated northern Italy and set the stage for Garibaldi's conquest of southern Italy. By 1871, Rome itself would be incorporated into the new Kingdom of Italy. The Ottoman Empire, despite being on the winning side, began its long retreat from Europe. Bulgaria would gain autonomy in 1878, becoming fully independent in 1908. Serbia and Montenegro expanded their territories. Greece would continue growing throughout the 19th century. The Balkan nations we know today, their very existence as independent states can be traced back to the power vacuum created by the Crimean War. But perhaps the most profound change was psychological. Europeans had believed in progress, in the civilizing mission of their great powers, in the idea that enlightened diplomacy could solve disputes without massive bloodshed. The Crimean War shattered these illusions. The photographs of Roger Fenton, the first war photographer in history, showed Europeans the reality of modern warfare. Bodies scattered across battlefields, soldiers living in filth, the mechanized horror of artillery bombardments. These images, mass-produced and distributed, changed how people thought about war and empire. The war also accelerated technological change in ways that would define the next century. The railroad allowed rapid troop movement. The telegraph enabled real-time communication across continents. Rifled firearms increased battlefield lethality. Naval warfare was revolutionized by steam power and iron armor. These innovations didn't just change military tactics, they transformed society. Railway networks that carried soldiers to war also carried goods and people in peace. Telegraph lines that coordinated military operations also enabled international business and journalism. The infrastructure of modern Europe was literally built on the lessons of the Crimean War. Let's talk about something most history books skip: the war's impact on women and social change. Florence Nightingale became an international celebrity, but she wasn't alone. Mary Seckle, a Jamaican-Scottish nurse, established her own hotel and medical facility near the front lines, challenging racial and gender barriers simultaneously. These women's contributions weren't just medical, they were political. Their success in saving soldiers' lives while male military leadership failed catastrophically gave ammunition to early women's rights advocates. The competence of women in crisis situations became a powerful argument for expanded female participation in public life. The economic consequences were equally revolutionary. The war cost Britain over £69 million, France over 1 billion francs, and Russia nearly 800 million rubles. Astronomical sums that required new methods of government financing. Modern bond markets, international banking, and public debt management all evolved to fund this conflict. War profiteering reached new heights, but so did economic integration. British factories produced weapons for Ottoman forces. French banks financed Russian reconstruction. Sardinian shipping companies carried supplies for all sides. The Crimean War marked the beginning of truly global capitalism as we understand it today. Here's something that will blow your mind. The war even changed how we eat. The development of canned food for military rations revolutionized diet across Europe. Condensed milk, invented to feed soldiers, became a household staple. Military medical advances in nutrition would transform civilian health practices for generations. The diplomatic revolution was equally profound. The old system where five great powers, Britain, France, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, managed European affairs was finished. New players like Sardinia had proven their worth. The Ottoman Empire demanded equal treatment. Smaller nations began asserting their rights to This wasn't just political theory. It was reshaping the map in real time. The Congress of Paris in 1856 established new principles: the integrity of the Ottoman Empire, the neutralization of the Black Sea, European guarantee of Danubian autonomy, and most importantly, the idea that military might alone didn't determine international legitimacy. But here's the twist that makes this story even more incredible. Many of the borders drawn or influenced by the Crimean War are still contested today. Crimea itself changed hands multiple times after 1856, from Russia to Ukraine in 1954. Back to Russia in 2014, the principles of territorial integrity established in 1856 are still being fought over in the exact same places, the Danubian principalities that became Romania. Their borders were repeatedly adjusted through 2 world wars and communist rule, but the basic national identity forged in the 1850s endures. The Balkan states, whose independence movements gained momentum after 1856, Yugoslavia rose and fell, but Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and others remain as testaments to the nationalist awakening that began with the Crimean War. Even more fascinating is how the war's media coverage established patterns we still see today. Embedded journalists, real-time war reporting, public opinion influencing policy, government propaganda campaigns. All of these were pioneered during the siege of Sebastopol. The relationship between warfare, media, and democracy that defines modern politics was born in the Crimean trenches. The technological innovations were equally enduring. The naval warfare lessons learned in the Black Sea directly influenced warship design through both world wars. The railroad logistics systems developed to supply the Crimean expedition became the template for military mobilization in 1914. Even the field medicine advances pioneered by Nightingale and others established protocols still used in modern combat surgery. Let me share a personal dimension that makes this history incredibly moving. In British cemeteries today, you'll find thousands of graves marked simply Crimean War veteran. These weren't professional soldiers. Many were ordinary men who volunteered for what they thought would be a quick, glorious campaign. They came home, changed forever, physically and mentally scarred by experiences no previous generation of Europeans had endured. Their stories, preserved in letters and memoirs, reveal the human cost of these grand geopolitical shifts. Samuel Magaw, a Highland Regiment private, wrote to his wife, "The whole world seems to be changing around us, and I fear we've unleashed something we cannot control." He was more prophetic than he knew. The war's end in 1856 didn't bring peace. It brought a different kind of tension. The balance of power was broken. National aspirations were awakened, and the competition for colonies and influence intensified. Within 15 years, 3 more major wars would reshape Europe: the Italian War of 1859, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, and the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Each of these conflicts built on precedents established during the Crimean War. The alliance between Sardinia and France that liberated northern Italy, negotiated in the margins of the Paris Peace Congress. Bismarck's diplomatic isolation of Austria, made possible by Russian resentment over Austria's betrayal during the Crimean conflict. Napoleon III's imperial ambitions that led to disaster in 1870, partly driven by the need to match his Crimean War successes. The Crimean War was like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples kept spreading for decades. The unification of Germany created a new great power in Central Europe. The unification of Italy eliminated Austrian influence in the peninsula. The independence of Romania and other Balkan states gradually pushed the Ottoman Empire back toward Asia. The modernization of Russia made it a more formidable competitor for Britain in Central Asia. By 1914, the Europe that went to war was fundamentally different from the Europe of 1853. Nation-states had largely replaced multi-ethnic empires. Democratic movements had gained strength from wartime experiences. Industrial capitalism had matured through military contracts and technological innovation. Modern warfare had evolved from Napoleonic traditions to mechanized slaughter. Looking at this transformation, it's impossible not to wonder. What would Europe have looked like if Tsar Nicholas I had never made his fateful demand about Orthodox Christians? Would Germany have unified? Would Italy have become a single nation? Would Romania exist? Would the Ottoman Empire have modernized successfully and survived into the 21st century? These counterfactual questions aren't just academic, they help us understand how contingent our modern world really is. The borders on today's European map, the nations we take for granted, the political principles we consider eternal. All of these emerged from specific historical moments, when different choices could have led to radically different outcomes. The Crimean War teaches us that individual decisions by political leaders can have consequences far beyond anything they imagined. Nicholas, I thought he was making a limited power play against a weak neighbor. Instead, he triggered a chain of events that redrew the map of Europe and established patterns of international relations that persist today. This brings us to perhaps the most important lesson of the Crimean War, the interconnectedness of seemingly distant events. A dispute over church keys in Bethlehem became a great power war. A great power war became a catalyst for technological innovation. Technological innovation became the foundation for modern industrial society. The siege of one fortress city became the birthplace of modern nursing, war journalism, and international law. As I finish telling you this remarkable story, I want you to think about the borders around you today. Whether you're looking at a map of Europe, reading about current international conflicts, or simply crossing from one country to another, remember that these lines weren't drawn by geography or natural law. They were created by human decisions, often made under pressure, sometimes by accident, always with consequences no one could fully foresee. The next time someone tells you that history doesn't matter, that old wars have nothing to teach us about current events, remind them of the Crimean War. Show them how a forgotten conflict over religious privileges became the earthquake that created modern Europe. Help them understand that the world we live in today was shaped by people who had no idea what they were creating. What do you think about this hidden story of European history? Can you see the connections between the Crimean War and current events in Eastern Europe? Have you ever wondered how different our world might be if that diplomatic crisis in 1853 had been resolved peacefully? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this fascinate you, if you want to discover more hidden connections between past and present, more forgotten wars that shaped our modern world, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Next week, I'll be revealing how a single assassination in Sarajevo created the Middle East as we know it today. Trust me, you won't want to miss that story. The past isn't really past, it's living all around us. In every border, every nation, every political principle we take for granted. Once you start seeing these connections, you'll never look at the news the same way again. Subscribe now, and let's explore these hidden histories together. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.